So today is going to be a little bit, for us, it's a first time. And let's see. I actually don't need to be online here. I don't need this computer, do I, sir? I don't need this, so I think I will just forget about that. But I want to welcome all the people who are here online. I know we have people who have been online for quite a lot, and we have people from South Africa, from other countries. So it's wonderful. It's so wonderful that this technology is a great thing in many ways. But it's also great to have all of you here today. It's fantastic that we really want the center to come back to life again. We can't just live through computers and mechanics, all the time. So, let's start with the prayers. Then. Palden save Lama Rinpoche Dage Chivo Pende Den Shula Kaden Chempe Gone Jesunte Kusum Tujing Adru Sadu So Sanje Chedang Soji Chonamla Shanjo Badu Dane Chapsuji Dage Jinso Jibe Sunamji Dola Penje Sanje Dupasho Sanje Chedang Soji Chonamla Shanjo Badu Dane Chapsuji Dage Jinso Jibe Sunamji Dola Penje Sanje Dupasho Sanje Chedang Soji Chonamla Shanjo Badu Dane Chapsuji Dage Jinso Jibe Sunamji Dola Penje Sanje Dupasho Semjen Tamje Dewe Dudan Dempa Jujik Dunga Dan Dunga Ji Dudan Delwa Jujik Dungal Mepe Dewa Dampa Dan Mindel Wajujik Nyering Chadan Dan Delwe Tonyom Chempola Nepa Jujik Semjen Tamje Dewa Dan Dewe Dudan Dempa Jujik Dunga Dan Dunga Ji Judan Delwa Jujik Dungal Mepe Dewa Dampa Dan Mindel Wajujik Nyering Chadan Dan Delwe Tonyom Chempola Nepa Jujik Semjen Tamje Dewe Dudan Dempa Jujik Dunga Dan Dunga Ji Judan Delwa Jujik Dunga Mepe Dewa Dampa Dan Mindel Wajujik Nyering Chadan Dan Delwe Tonyom Chempola Nepa Jujik Ning to chempa payo len mantra Lord chempa chukun denye se Drupa chempa chamdra che anton Lord sa chempa shabla solvande Nutu chempa kunda seneche Kaje chempa lama nyepatse Sundu chempa drupe jasenso Repa chempa shabla solvande Tekpa chempa rikcho yonso se Shaja chempa topa ngandojo Tenle chempa kada nyampadal Nigam chempa shabla solvande Tampa namla gupe satabdu Trubju tensen chonam shabten jing Tempa rinjen jojo je padang Jik tengele chempa chapa sho Jewa kunto yanda lamadang Drame chuchi bala lon chuching Sadang lam je yanten rab sone Doje change gopang nyo top sho So, as always, when we start any Dharma practice, any Dharma study, any Dharma sessions or focus, we should start with the right motivation. And now it's an auspicious day because it's the first time we are doing courses here again. So we should think that through engaging with the Dharma, through studying, through learning, through integrating it in our own life, that we may really develop in a positive way, in a positive direction, and this year may become a really wonderful year, and that we may, benefit from the Dharma ourselves, so we can be a benefit to others. That's the motivation we should have, but we should not go into a Dharma session just like blah, 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 like, oh yes, this is what I usually do, sit down and then start something else. We need to be conscious when we deal with Dharma. Dharma is special. Why is Dharma special? Dharma is special because it can transform our mind. Dharma is special because it can transcend suffering. That's why it's special. What more special could we find? We can buy chocolate, we can buy crisp, we can buy cake, we can buy all these different things. What can they do for us? They have a momentary, oh, that was nice, that was delicious, that was lovely, I want more. Maybe we end up having so much more that we end up having a tummy ache and we feel bad and we never want to see that kind of cake again, That's how it normally works in life, right? We want and we don't want, we like and we don't like. The things we like become the things that we dislike or the things that make us feel bad. Dharma is different. Dharma is the path that frees us from suffering. Is a path that has the potential to free us from suffering. Now it's not guaranteed that it will free us from suffering because, as you know, it depends on us. It's in our hands, like the Buddha said. He could not do it for any of all those great arhats, all those great bodhisattvas that lived at the time of the Buddha. All of them, they had to complete their own journey and complete their own path that they had started. They had to do it themselves. So if he couldn't do it for the great bodhisattvas and all those great beings who were so fortunate, who had such good karma to be alive at the time of the Buddha, He also cannot do it for us because we are more hard work. We have more to do. So we have to do it ourselves, is what he said. There's no magic cure, there's no magic pill, there's no magic sort of solution. It depends on it probably depends on many things. It depends on our karma. But it depends on causes and conditions coming together. It depends on our interest. It depends on our dedication. It depends on our diligence. It depends on our faith and our devotion. But all these things are things and attitudes that we can change and improve on. It's not as if we were born with pure faith and devotion. It's not as if we were born with diligence, and either we have diligence or we don't. Either we are dedicated practitioners or we are lazy layabouts. It doesn't work like that. We can change. We can become more diligent. We can increase our devotion. We can grow our faith. We can grow our interest. And so how much we benefit on the Dharma depends on us, really. But the point is that all of us have that potential, all of us have that possibility of freeing our own mind, of finding inner peace, of overcoming our stress and our depression or our anger, our negative tendencies, whatever they are. We can all change them, we can all overcome them, we can all become at ease with who we are, we can all become at ease in our life, and we can all become more skillful in dealing with whatever sort of happens in our life on a day-to-day basis. So, change is possible. Change is the good news of Dharma is that we can all benefit, we can all grow. And so for that reason, we should not treat it like I said at the beginning, we should not treat it like just anything else we do. That's why we should always be mindful around, like when we're in a shrine room. It's not like just any old place. It's a place that helps us to move forward and find freedom and all these things I just mentioned. Whenever we study, that's why we show respect, because we recognize this is the potential of the Dharma. That's why we act in certain ways around the Dharma. That's why we don't put it on the floor, the text on the floor, because we recognize even though it's just a piece of paper, it has that potential to change and to help us. So we have to start with a good motivation. That's what I'm saying to you now. Whenever we study, whenever we practice, the more you are aware of your own motivation, the more mindful you are, the more benefit you will get. So all of these things are also for our own benefit. So we start with that motivation of saying, I want to really engage with a meditation, with a Dharma, so I can, purify my own mind and I can ultimately reach enlightenment, so I can be a benefit for others. I guess our motivation will be different for all of us, because some of you may not consider yourselves Buddhists. Some of you may feel that you don't even know what enlightenment is. But so you can dedicate it to having a good, wholesome life, where your life is spent in not harming others, but doing positive things, like doing beneficial things for others. So at least we give up harm and we practice positive actions during this life. So what we've seen through this whole period of when lockdown started, we've seen how fragile everything is. And even though the Dharma has been giving us that message all along, everything is impermanent, right? 4 thoughts, the 4 thoughts of precious human birth, impermanence, cause and effect, and suffering of samsara. These are what we say the foundation for our path. That we need to really assimilate the fact that we have potential, the precious human birth. We have all the conditions, causes and conditions have come together for us to nurture the potential of our inner goodness and, become decent human beings who can do good things with our life. But we have also seen the impermanence of all things. We've also seen how fragile all things are. And even though we were studying impermanence on the paper, in words, how much we have actually assimilated the truth of impermanence, that is something we can see by our own reaction. Our own reactions to all these external things will show us where will show us our mental stability or lack of mental stability. It will show us our weaknesses, or it will show us our strengths. So we need to take note. We need to be aware and see how have I coped during this whole period. How was it? And if there were certain difficulties, those difficulties show us where we should work stronger on our own mind. What were the things that brought out a lot of stress and anxiety for me? Was I afraid of getting ill? Was I afraid of sickness and dying or death? Was I afraid of losing my loved ones? There's so many facets to the whole situation that will show us where where it will be helpful for us to observe and look and see. Maybe I can reduce my own attachment. Maybe I would be able to deal better and be more beneficial or helpful for others, for my family, for my loved ones, if I have less attachment. Still, you have lots of love for your family and close ones, but if there's less attachments, for example, that might make me less anxious. Attachment will make me anxious. If there's less aversion to the situation, I can develop more acceptance and I can deal better with all the different sort of challenges that are thrown at me. So what I think we should do is, we are happy that the lockdown is coming to an end, and it looks like things are coming gradually, at least here in the UK, they're becoming more normal and people are going out and we don't have to wear masks, we don't have to have all these restrictions. But we ought to analyze and look back on the time and learn from what happened in the sense of Dharma, and observe and see where could I develop more strength within myself. Because if we've seen now, and if we really do believe in impermanence, then we also know that will continue. It's not as if, things were impermanent before and now we are back to permanence again. Now we are back to normality again. That's actually a wrong view, isn't it? It's completely wrong to assume that things ever can go back to normal, that there is any form of normality. That is a false sense of security that we all have. That's what this whole virus has taught us. We have a false sense of security. Now, of course, we see, if you read the news, then there are other threats happening. How do we know? I have actually said this many times in the past. I remember, maybe not to all of you, but to some people in the past in courses, trying to remind you that, we've been very, very fortunate to live in Europe during this period of time where there's been peace at least in my generation. I was born after the war. All of you, I think, were born after the last war. We are fortunate, one or two generations, like how, during between 45 and now, we cannot guarantee that that will continue. So when you contemplate impermanence, we recognize that there is no solid ground really to stand on. And that's when we really absorb or integrate impermanence, we recognize that, we are aware of that, and we live in the moment. If we take that to heart. I think it was Trungpa Rinpoche who said that living in the moment is a bit like you're balancing at the top of a flagpole. You can't afford to lean one way or the other, but you have to be very, very focused. So if we could, that's how we should live our life, as if we were all the time balancing on top of a flagpole. Like the point is that the present moment is here and now, but it's alive and cannot be frozen in time. We cannot freeze anything into normality and then get attached to that. If you had a lot of attachment to how things were before the lockdown, it shows you that you have not integrated the truth of impermanence. If you had a lot of attachment to how things were, or how things ought to be, how you want these things to come back again, it shows this basic, we need to work more on our attitude and integrate these four thoughts. I'm just mentioning that it's not really part of what we're supposed to be looking at today, but it's important. And again, the four thoughts are probably more important than any other Dharma you can study. And we should not think of the four thoughts as something for the sort of beginners, kindergarten, first level Dharma practice. If we do not integrate the four thoughts, we cannot build on, or we cannot move forward, we cannot progress. Like we say, the foundations in any building, right? You have to have strong foundations. And without strong foundations, the walls will crumble. Anything you build, you might have a very fancy house and fancy golden roof, but without strong foundations, it will all come apart. So for that reason, you will see that in the teachings, they're always emphasized. And now we know why, right? Now we understand death and impermanence, precious human birth, cause and effect, suffering of samsara. This is constant. It's not something that we can now say goodbye to. No. That we can now think, oh, we're back to normal again. So please remember that. But let's look at what we were going to... this was all part of it. I was asking you to have the right motivation. I didn't really know what to put on the program, but I thought just today is more about just celebrating and coming back to the center. It doesn't matter too much what I talk about. And that's why I also thought, well, just one short thing here, one short thing the next Saturday, one short thing the next Saturday. It's not like we're starting some deep text or anything. It's about you coming back, it's about you being happy to be back. We should celebrate that you are able to come back, and I'm really happy that you're all here. And we will have a break. They will expect us again in the tea room at 3:30, so we have half an hour now. And then we come back in and do a second session. But like I say, today is about celebrating. But what I was going to talk to you about is just a short section from this text that's called the Precious Garland. Because the Precious Garland, which this is the book with a commentary by Gampopa Rinpoche, Precious Garland of the Supreme Path. This has many little sections. That's what makes it into a garland. All these, each of the sections is like one bead of the garland. So a whole book makes up a whole garland of precious advice. And this is one of the main instructions by Gampopa, who's an important lineage holder for all of the Kagyu lineage. And so in terms of something, then I just picked something from there, calling the 10 kindnesses. Each of the little beads or the pearls are made up of 10 different things, 10 different advices. So this is about the advice of kindness to oneself. I thought you might like that. Kindness to yourself. It's something very attractive, isn't it? We're kind to ourselves. It wasn't about being kind to others. It's like kindness to ourselves. So, but it's true, we have to be kind to ourselves. And of course, Gampopa is not talking about kindness in an ordinary sense. He's talking about it in a Dharma, in a much deeper sense that how we normally think about kindness. So I think most of you know about Gampopa. He was living in the 11th, 12th century. If you any of you are on the Dorje Chang course, I have sort of looked at the life of Gampopa a little bit. And Gampopa was prophesied by Buddha Sakyamuni in what's called the Samadhi Raja Sutra. Gampopa was prophesied, the king of Samadhi Sutra. And also in another text called the White Lotus Sutra, White Lotus Compassion Sutra. So he was prophesied by the Buddha as someone who would be very influential in establishing the teachings in the north, in Tibet. And Gampopa was very influential in the Kagyu lineage in that he united the Mahamudra yogic lineages and the Kadampa lineage of Atisha. So the Kadampa lineage that had a lot of emphasis on discipline and sort of right conduct and the foundations, with a more, you could call, more wild Mahamudra lineage. So he brought the foundations, he gave a very strong stability and completeness to the Kagyu lineage by uniting those two lineages at that time in Tibet. And the other text that's very important from Gampopa is called the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, you might know. It also, now there are many different translations of it, and it has the title has been changed a little bit in some of the newer versions, but it's mostly known as a Jewel Ornament of Liberation, which encompasses the whole path, the Dharma path. So it's very much of a study textbook. So those are good to know about. And Gampopa, you can read about his life. Gampopa, he was a lay person. As a young person he married and he had children, and he was a doctor, a physician, living in Tibet. And at that time, when he had a young family, there was an epidemic that spread in Tibet, and he was unable, there was apparently no cure for this epidemic. And so he was unable to help all the patients that came to him. He was unable to make people better. And he was also unable to help his own wife and his children who died. So in his life story in great detail, it describes how difficult that was for him, all the difficulties, and his wife died very slowly, and then his children as well. So he lost everything. And then when that happened, then he decided to dedicate himself to the Dharma, and he became a monk when he was quite young. And then he started studying in this Kadampa lineage with many masters, and he became very learned, a great, actually, bodhisattva. By the time he then met Milarepa, who was a yogi in Tibet at that time, and became his guru, his main master. Can you all hear me, by the way? Yeah? Okay. If you can't, you can also move closer. I'm not sure if I can shout too much, but are you okay in the back? Good. So you might all have heard about Milarepa, who was a famous yogi and a great example of renunciation, and how, his dedication to the Dharma. His dedication to the Dharma is what, and to practice, is what makes him stand out, and the result that he had from that. So Gampopa eventually heard about Milarepa, and in his life story it also talks about all the difficulties he went through in finding Milarepa, in the journey of looking for Milarepa, eventually finding Milarepa, and then having his audience with Milarepa. And then he stayed with Milarepa for a period of time and studied with him until Milarepa sent him off to start a monastery. So Gampopa started the first Kagyu monastery in the lineage. Before then, it was a yogic lineage. Before then, it was Milarepa, who was a yogi. There was Mapa, who was a farmer. There was Tilopa and Naropa, who were Indian yogis. So Gampopa was the first monastic lineage holder, and he started the first Kagyu monastery. And had a huge impact, because then the lineage really grew from then onwards with all the great... that's why it said that the road from Lhasa to his monastery was when it was red, because the sun was shining on all the monks and nuns who were doing pilgrimage to his monastery. So there were so many endless pilgrims going to his monastery that the roads were shining red. Whether that's actually true, I don't know, but it's illustrating how busy his monastery was, and how many people came to see him, and how the lineage grew from then onwards. So his texts are, of course, very important, and his Precious Garland that he wrote is very important as well. And what is important when we study texts like this? And I'm telling you this because, of course, we're not really studying this text in depth, but this is, in a sense, it is with any Dharma that we study, that the way we approach it, we should approach it as if Gampopa is speaking to us. Gampopa is speaking to me personally. He's not talking to someone, in the 11th century. He's talking to me here and now. It's directly relating to me. It's directly relating to my mind. And of course, that's why we say that the Dharma is old and new at the same time. Because the Dharma is old because it started at the time of the Buddha 2,600 years ago. So some people might think, well, this is old-fashioned, this is outdated, this doesn't relate to 21st century, this is like 2,500 years ago. How can it relate to the 21st century modern world? Some people might think that, because it is old, it's ancient. But the Dharma is timeless. The Dharma is new and fresh, because it relates to the mind. It relates to my mind. It relates to your mind. It relates to the present. The culture doesn't matter. The century doesn't matter. The country doesn't matter. The language doesn't matter. What it's talking about is our mind. Whether you live in India, whether you live in the West, whether you live in North, South, we all go through ups and downs. We all have certain needs. We all have certain sufferings and obstacles. And if we look at it, it's the same thing. Like whether you lose a child when you live in the West, whether you lose a child when you live in East or North or South, the suffering will be the same. Whether you are sick, or you lose a loved one to sickness, or whatever sort of ups and downs we go through, doesn't matter if it's in this century or previous century, centuries ago. People were still suffering through loss of loved ones. They were still happy when they were cared for and looked after. There were similar causes of suffering then as there are causes of suffering now. That's what the Buddha taught, the causes of suffering and how to find freedom from suffering. I'm sometimes very skeptical when I see, if I read a book, or if I see some sort of article or film or whatever that describes the past times, like when you go back centuries in time, and people look so primitive. The idea is that the further we go back in time, the more primitive people were. I actually don't believe in that at all. Culture would have been different, of course. The way people say hello to each other, greet each other, the fashion, the way whatever sort of communication was accepted or not accepted, certain things would be different. But when it comes to the human condition, I don't think that their feelings were less refined than now, or that their caring for their loved ones was less refined than now. Of course, there are many things that have been developed in society that didn't exist. Hygiene and all these things, science. But when it comes to the human mind, I don't think that we are so more progressive actually than centuries ago, in many ways. But that's just my own personal view. But the point what I'm trying to make is that the Dharma is fresh, and the Dharma has to be fresh. Your Dharma has to be fresh. Your practice has to be fresh. You should not approach the Dharma as history, or you should not approach the Dharma as knowledge. You should approach the Dharma, and this is what I wanted to say to you about this text. You should approach it as a mirror. The Dharma is a mirror to show you your own face, so that you can see your own face. So the Dharma should speak to you directly, just like a mirror tells the truth. The mirror doesn't lie, right? If you have a dirty face, it will show. And when we see our own dirty face in the mirror, we don't try to clean the mirror either. We know we have to clean our face. We know it's about me. It's me. It's not the mirror. It's me. So that's how we should use the Dharma. All our Dharma studies and our Dharma practice should be like a mirror. It should speak to us directly in a way that helps us to see our weaknesses, our strengths. I have a nice my skin is so beautiful, so it's okay to compliment yourself if you have very beautiful skin, or you have a beautiful nose, or I also have, maybe my nose is a bit big, or whatever, or you think I have a lot of dirt on my forehead. So whatever you see, that's what you see. I mean, it's not about judging, of course. It's not about being beautiful or not beautiful. It's not about judging in that way. But it's, when I say a mirror, it's about seeing our weaknesses, knowing our weaknesses. We're quite bad at knowing who we are. That's ignorance, right? We don't really see ourselves for what we are. That's quite difficult. We see only what we are capable of seeing, but we have limited vision, like we cannot see our own face. And the reason we cannot see our own face, and the reason we have limited vision of who we are, is because our mind is very distracted, and our mind is sort of, our mental activity is disturbed. We have a lot of distraction. And that distraction is what distorts our view. Distraction and projection and conceptualizing distorts our view of reality, of who we are and of what is here. So that's why we need a mirror. That's why we need something external to show us what is real. And that's how we should approach this text, the Precious Garland of the Sublime Path. So, in terms of the title, it says this Precious Garland of the Sublime Path. I told you already, it's all these beads that make up, beads of advice, of oral instruction from Gampopa that make up this garland. And then he starts the text by saying, there's like a paying homage. All these texts, they always start by paying homage to their gurus. Because part of a sign of a good practitioner is humility. The less ego, the more humble you are, the more you sort of appreciate all your teachers and all the teachings. So a great master would never forget their guru, would never sort of think, oh, that's over, I can forget about that, I don't need my guru anymore. But they always pay homage and pay respect. So there's this homage in composing the text where he's paying homage to his guru and to all the Kagyu lineage masters. So I'll just read it for you quickly. So he says, adorned with the pure conduct of the precious Kagyu, you help us traverse the ocean of samsara, so terrifying and difficult to cross. Your stream of blessings is as inexhaustibly immense as the expanse of the great ocean. And your aspirations are vast, enduring, and spontaneously accomplished. All noble masters of the flawless practice lineage, I bow before you. Please be my refuge and grant your blessings. That's beautiful, isn't it? I'm afraid I'm not here to tell you jokes today. I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to present you the Dharma. And this is words of Gampopa himself to his own guru. They're so inspiring. When you read these dohas, lineage masters' expression of their wisdom and their appreciation, it is so profound. All of the words that he uses are so beautiful. So this is how all the texts normally start, and then they go on. He goes on to write a pledge to write the text. So he makes his pledge to write the text. So he says, having cherished the spoken advice of these Kagyu masters in my heart for so long, I shall now write down these most treasured oral instructions for those fortunate ones who are directly or indirectly devoted to me as a precious garland that is the sublime path. So he's saying, I will write this down for all of you. That means all of us. All of us fortunate ones. He says, all of those fortunate ones who are directly or indirectly connected to him. We are all maybe indirectly connected because many generations ago, but we are all connected to the lineage holders and to Gampopa's teaching. So he's saying, he's speaking to generations into the future. And then he goes on to talk about these, I'm not starting right from the beginning of the text, but he talks about these kindnesses, these 10. Here are the 10 ways to do yourself a kindness. So commitment to, I think it speaks for itself, what I've read to you before. So maybe we start that, we sit and we meditate, just because now we have come to almost to the break. So let's just sit and meditate together for 10 minutes before our break, and then we look at those 10 kindnesses in the next session. All right? So you can sit and just appreciate being here and generate a motivation of appreciation and rejoicing of our current situation. So in the next session we can also have questions, if you have any questions. And we'll now have a break. And we'll do the dedication. So let's dedicate their merit to peace and well-being. You might want to think of everyone in Ukraine, if you wish. Or think of just all sentient beings. Oisunam de tamje sepane tomne nye pedanam pamjene jegana je balab tupaye sepe sole doa dolwa sho. Shanju semne rinpoche maje panam je jojik che pa nyampa me padang kone kondu pelwa sho. Palden save lama rinpoche dage jiwa pende den shula kaden chemba gone jisunde kusundu jinga dup sadu so let's we'll look very briefly at these 10 kindnesses because we don't have so much time. And when you read through them, what one can tell is that mostly they talk about attachment and aversion, giving up attachment and aversion, giving up attachment to various aspects. So I'll just look at them a little bit, okay? So he says, you do yourself a kindness by giving up the attachments and aversions of worldly life and practice the pure Dharma. So that's the first kindness, giving up attachment and aversion of worldly life. So generally like distraction, worldly distraction. It just means really that we need to look in our life and see what are my priorities? Have I got my priorities right? Is the way I'm spending my time, is it meaningful? Is it useful? Is it a waste of time? Or is it even negative? Is it even harmful? So we need to analyze and look at our own life and see if there is a lot of grasping and aversion, likes and dislikes in our life. Here it relates especially to friends and enemies, but generally attachment and aversion and ignorance are what you say the root of all our mental distress. Ignorance, attachment and aversion, the 3 root kleshas. So what he's saying is give up, try to give up ignorance, attachment and aversion. Then this will bring you the greatest benefit. Ignorance, of course, the way to free ourselves from ignorance is meditation. Meditate, develop clarity, develop inner awareness and mindfulness. Mindfulness in everything we do, awareness in our day-to-day life, awareness of how we think, awareness of how our mind works, and mindfulness. Trying not to allow our thoughts to go down negative tracks that really doesn't benefit us. So negative tracks like attachment and grasping, neediness, or aversion, resentment. It brings us so much unhappiness. The negative emotions are what bring us unhappiness, and distraction is what gives rise to negative emotions. So we need to combat distraction. Here, when he talks about giving up attachment and aversion of worldly life, worldly life is what is meant by worldly life. In one way, everything is worldly life, but in another way, if we have a good and positive motivation and a clear mind, everything can also be Dharma. All of our activities can become Dharma activities. Your daily work can be a way for you to integrate the Dharma and to train on your path. That's what we're learning when we look at all the lineage masters, seeing how Tilopa was grinding sesame seeds in the daytime. That was his job. If he could spend his life grinding sesame seeds and become enlightened, then, it shows us that all the different mundane, on the surface, mundane activities, if we apply the right mindset and the right motivation, then they can become a path of practice. If we apply mindfulness to our day-to-day activities, to whatever your job is, whether you work in an office, whether you work in a restaurant, whether you work in a school, whether you work in a hospital, whatever your job is, if you can be very mindful and present and have a positive attitude and not let your thoughts and mindset get carried away with thoughts of grasping or thoughts of judgment, negative judgment, resentment, or sort of painful mind states, then you are doing well in terms of practice. Because when we look at practice, and when we say meditation practice, part of it is the formal practice when we sit on the cushion, and the other many, many hours is when we are busy in daily life. You have to eat and cook and clean and go shopping and do all your day-to-day stuff. So we can't just forget about that time and think that that has nothing to do with Dharma. What we need to do is learn to integrate Dharma into all these different activities. That means we should be mindful. We should not allow our mind to get pulled into attachment and aversion. That's what Gampopa is telling us. Don't get pulled into thoughts of grasping, wanting things to be different than they are. Always wanting more than what we have, but just be content with little. Actually, a lot of this advice also refers to simplifying our life. Less attachment helps us to simplify our life, not to need so many different things, and to be happy with whatever we have. But so he's saying, give up attachment and aversion to worldly life, and instead practice the pure Dharma, because that will be of great benefit. That's why he's saying it's a great kindness to ourselves, because through practicing the Dharma, through giving up, you could call it meaningless distraction, things that just take us in a circle, where we have been so many times in the same situation, in the same place, in the same sort of rut, but it hasn't brought much benefit, hasn't been very meaningful. So we should try to avoid that continuous circling around and caught between this attachment, aversion, negative emotions, and instead try to develop mindfulness and awareness in practice. So I remember Trungpa Rinpoche saying that distraction is very dangerous. He said it's like if you're passing your hand between the teeth of a tiger. We wouldn't really do that, right? If the tiger was sitting there in front of us, mouth open, we wouldn't just for fun go and put our hand through and think that could be interesting. But that's what we do in a metaphorical sense when we are distracted. When we allow ourselves to get caught by distraction, we are doing just that, because the root of the negative emotions is distraction. Distractions give rise to negative emotions. When we're distracted, that's when we get carried away by those mindsets that we know too well. We know them very well. We all go there sometimes. That's because we were not mindful. We were not alert. We were not aware, and we played with this tiger. So instead, with mindfulness, there's a lot of benefit by having control over our mind, our motivation, and the kleshas. So then he goes on to say, you do yourself a kindness by leaving behind, well, you might not like this one, it says, leaving behind family and friends and following a sublime master. Shall we skip that one? Well, that's what he says. Gampopa knows best, right? You do yourself a kindness by leaving behind family and friends and following a sublime personage. But what you can do go into retreat from time to time. You can dedicate yourself to Dharma at certain times, and I think that's very helpful and healthy in a relationship. If you can say to your partner, this is really important to me, I need to dedicate some time for my own growth. It's also good for you, it's good for both of us, because I will be a better person when I come out of retreat. I will be easier to live with. So let me go for a week or two, let me go for a month every year, let me go for 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there, and you can do the same. That's a healthy relationship, I think, if people can do that. And the Dharma really doesn't, when you talk about non-attachment, it doesn't mean that you have to leave everything behind and leave all your loved ones behind. It means you have to leave attachment behind, grasping and attachment. And I think all of you know very well that in family life, in relationships, and in friendships, attachments are actually a hindrance to a good relationship, isn't it? Attachment means clinging, it means grasping, it means holding on for me. It doesn't mean giving freedom to the other person. It doesn't mean trusting the other person. Actually, attachment and clinging, it's a lack of trust. Then the more we are lacking trust, the more we hold on to something because we're afraid of losing it. But if you have trust in each other, and I always say, like in relationships, they should be based on trust. You need to trust that other person, whatever they do, they're not going to hurt you. At least not intentionally. We may hurt others unintentionally, but if you are committed to each other in a relationship, that relationship has to be based on a commitment to allow each other to grow and to trust that you will live your life together, but in a way that does not hurt the other person. So, for example, if you are committed to one person, you're not with someone else because that hurts that other person. It is the recipe for a breakup and for jealousy and all sorts of negative emotions. So there are many things that, in terms of the Buddhist teachings on attachment and non-attachment, I think we should be aware that it doesn't really mean that we must turn our back on everything and go and live in a cave or go and live in retreat or become a monk or become a nun. It means working on our mind in the best possible way in your current situation. And in terms, like I said, all the lineage masters, Mapa was a family man, right? there are many examples in the lineage masters of how Dharma can be integrated in every situation in our life. So what you need is to give up grasping, give up jealousy, give up selfishness in terms of family and friends, and follow the Sublime Master, because that is possible. I mean, I don't know, we can't ask Gampopa, but I know that many of the great teachers, this is how they explain when you say attachment or non-attachment. It's about the mind. It's not about your physical situation. None of the masters tell you to really say you need to just leave your mother and your father, leave your wife and your husband. No. Learn to live with your wife and your husband. Learn to look after your parents. Akong Rinpoche was always telling everybody they must look after their parents. Lama Yeshe Rinpoche is telling everybody you should look after your parents. Don't let your parents go to an old age home. Look after them because they looked after you. So I think we should see it like that, but the importance here is the part that says follow a sublime master, meaning a lineage. Rely on the lineage masters. Rely on the lineage masters who embody the teachings and who can help us to guide us so that our life becomes meaningful. Then the third one, he says, you do yourself a kindness by giving up distractions and engaging in learning, reflection, and meditation. So here we already talked about distraction, but here basically it means anything that takes me away from the Dharma. If something takes you away from the Dharma, that's too high a price to pay. That's a distraction that is not a kindness to yourself. If it takes you away from how you can ultimately benefit yourself and others. So you need to give up distraction, and instead of using your time on this sort of busyness that makes us run around in circles but doesn't have much reward, we should engage in studying, learning the Dharma, in thinking and reflecting and contemplating on the Dharma, and in meditation, actually assimilating the Dharma. So distraction, the busyness. Busyness that you probably remember that laziness, one of the ways that laziness expresses itself is also distraction. It is busyness that it makes us feel like we are very, very busy with things, but those things that we're busy with are not really important or meaningful or beneficial. And it's a way of avoiding getting on with the things that are more important. So sometimes it expresses itself like that, laziness. Then Gampopa says, you do yourself a kindness by abandoning, what does it say here? Familiarity with village people and neighbors, and living alone in secluded places. And living alone in secluded. So it's a similar thing to before, meaning don't get distracted with just this and that, but try to do some intensive retreat. Try to really go deep in the Dharma. The Dharma should also not be just superficial entertainment. I mean, it can be inspiring and it can be entertaining, but it has to go deep for us. So that's why he says, live alone in secluded places if you can. And the reason for this abandoning familiarity with village people and neighbors, Dupan Rinpoche explained that as when we are with some relatives and friends, they have all kinds of ideas of what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And So we become subjected to their whims, the whims of relatives and friends. It's like you have to take all their considerations into their opinions into consideration, even if it's not really important. So it's that kind of dependency that he's talking about. And then he says, you do yourself a kindness by cutting the ties of sense pleasures and remaining stable in non-attachment. Cutting the ties of sense pleasures. So being entangled in desire for pleasurable things. Now we can, maybe none of you really feel that it's an issue that, or that this is an issue for you. Many people do live a very materialistic life. You know, you have to have the latest model of everything, or the latest fashion, etc. So being ruled by desire and commercial sort of interests, like we are always like living in London. There's so many advertisements. There's so many opportunities for getting ideas that we need. You know, we have so many needs. The advertisements are designed to stir up desire, isn't it? So it's again a message that we should be aware. We should be mindful not to let attachment get the better of us. And then he says, you do yourself a kindness by being content with the bare necessities and not craving better things. So be satisfied, learn to live a simple life, simplicity. And of course, it's a mind state. It's not about what we have, but it's about being content mentally with what we have. So, and also when we talk about solitude, sometimes we can't always be in solitude, but the mind can find solitude. The mind can be at peace, even if the body, even if you're living in a busy city like London, even if you are having a busy life, even if you are physically very busy, you have to go to work every day, etc., you can still find mental solitude. If you have mindfulness and awareness, this means that you can be within a busy crowd, you can still be at peace mentally, or have this sense of spaciousness, mental spaciousness. So at the end of this, then I will see if you have any questions about this. So the seventh one, he says, you do yourself a kindness by keeping a steadfast resolve without letting yourself fall under the influence of others. So this line talks about how it's important to in like being your own boss in some ways, knowing what is good for you, knowing what is a bad influence, knowing what is a positive influence, knowing what is a negative influence, and surrounding yourself with a positive influence, with good friends, people that have a good influence on you, not to surrender your freedom to others. In the Tibetan saying is not to be pulled by or to lead by the nose rope of others, like a yak. They put the rope in the nose and pull the yak along. So in that way, we should not be influenced by others. We should be steady in ourselves in terms of what is right and what is wrong. We should know ourselves what is right and what is wrong. And if we are surrounded by negative influences, we should not be swayed by that, be swayed by others. But try to surround ourselves by positive influence, good influence of others, And if we are under negative influence, we should not allow that to sway ourselves. And the next one says, you do yourself a kindness by pursuing the lasting happiness of awakening without regard for the temporary pleasures of this life. So it says you do yourself a kindness by dedicating yourself to Dharma, to make the Dharma central in your life, because that is how you get long-term benefit. By the time we die, by the time, or when we really need the strength, the things that give us strength is the mind training, the degree of mental stability that we have. Without mental stability, then we are swayed by everything around us. So he's saying that if we can really dedicate and make the Dharma central in our lives, that is the best kindness we can do ourselves, instead of just running in circles and chasing this and chasing that. Certain things, I'm sure, you do need to engage with. You know, you do need to have an income, you do need to have a roof over your head and certain sort of material things. But I suppose there's a difference in whether that is the main focus or whether your main focus is on something genuinely beneficial. So then he says, you do yourself a kindness by giving up clinging to things as being real and bringing emptiness into your experience. So he's saying we should try to remember the ultimate view, and not to fixate on appearances as being solid or independently existing of their own accord, as we say. So this belief in duality, we should try to cultivate a recognition, or at least remind ourselves of the lack of solidity of all things. Even by simply thinking about impermanence, we can see how there is no real solidity in anything in our life. We cannot find any real solidity. And a lot of the times by us trying to fixate and trying to make things solid, we cause ourselves a lot of problems. We cause ourselves a lot of suffering. So simply reminding ourselves of the impermanence and of the lack of reality or solid existence in everything, in our experiences and things around us. Everything is constantly changing. Our body is changing. Our friends are changing. There's nothing we can really find that hasn't changed since yesterday, day before, last year, etc. So that also helps us to give up attachment when we look at that. It gradually lessens our attachment. So that's why it's a kindness to ourselves, by remembering that. Then the last one says, you do yourself a kindness by exerting yourself in the two accumulations, without giving into ordinary thoughts, words, and deeds. So, in terms of Dharma activities and Dharma practice, he says we should put effort into the two accumulations. Two accumulations mean the accumulation of virtue and accumulation of merit. The accumulation of wisdom and the accumulation of merit. So by studying, contemplating, practicing, we're accumulating this. So our understanding grows. This sense of knowing, understanding the Dharma, understanding ourselves, etc., nature of reality, this grows gradually. And so wisdom, accumulation of wisdom is growing. And then accumulation of merit is, you could say, through the other 6 perfections. So you have the accumulation of wisdom is one of the 6 perfections. Then you have generosity, patience, diligence, right conduct, meditation are the other 5. That's how we, by applying them in body, speech and mind, then gradually we are accumulating merit. So Gampopa is saying, you're being very kind to yourself by meditating. You're being very kind to yourself by putting effort in all these different aspects of living your life in a way, in the right way, like right speech, right action, right thinking. And not giving in, he says, without giving in to ordinary thoughts, words and deeds. So without giving in to our habitual patterns. That's what Dharma is about. That's what our meditation training is about, isn't it? Recognizing what are our habits that tend to get in the way, and then changing those habits. So keeping pure motivation, keeping pure outlook in mind, and not selfish motivation, altruistic motivation. So this is how he's saying, these are the 10 kindnesses that I've just rattled through very quickly. And that you will find in this, of course, in this book with Khenpo-Kata's explanation. So what I thought might be nice is we have like some little bit of time left, is maybe if you have any questions and if there's anything, it doesn't necessarily have to be about these particular 10 points, but anything that you would like to talk about, we can do, yeah.
I would like to hear from you what mindfulness is in your own words, how you experienced it and what it is for you.
Okay. So mindfulness, when generally when it's used in a Buddhist context, and that's how I relate to it as well, is being in the present moment. So being aware in the present moment, being aware of your actions, your like body, speech and mind, but being present. That so not being caught up in the past, not being caught up in the future, but engaging with whatever it is you're doing. Now, I have to just say I'm not always mindful. I have to say that, just so you. It doesn't mean that even if I can say that, phrase that, it doesn't mean that I always manage to be mindful. But sometimes we are more challenged than other times. Sometimes it's harder to be mindful, to be present. But if we are alert, if we are awake, if we are there, we are mindful. If somebody throws you a tennis ball, you catch it. Somebody throws you a frisbee, you catch it. Anything that happens, if somebody shouts at you, that's a harder ball to catch. If somebody insults you, you don't get angry because you were mindful. You were mindful, so you did not react. Maybe you were mindful, but your mindfulness was not strong enough. Maybe if somebody threw you a ball, you were mindful enough to catch the ball, but if somebody insulted you, you were not mindful enough. Your mindfulness was not strong enough, and your reaction was you got angry in return. So we can be mindful in the present moment, but our mindfulness has to be strong. And we have to become skillful. We have to learn to become mindful. We have to become skillful so that when something happens, even though part of me just really wants to tell that person the truth of how horrible they are, or whatever it is in return, then we know that if I do that, that's a bad idea for many, many reasons. And it's going to make things worse, and I'm going to feel worse. But if I manage to be mindful and keep my guard And just don't get involved in their story. Just be there, be in the present moment. Then your mindfulness is strong enough. So of course when I say throw a ball, the ball is what all these different situations that happen. Sometimes nice things happen, sometimes difficult things happen. Sometimes you're with challenging people, sometimes you're with people that are very, very nice to you and everything is smooth. And this is where we need to learn to be able to ride all these different situations and be present so that we don't react with negativity. Because that's the key point in mindfulness. Like mindfulness, when we're not mindful, we're distracted. When we're distracted, our negative emotions arise. When the negative emotions arise, we act them out and we create a lot of negative extensions, negative karma. So it's just like snowballing more and more and more. Okay. That was not a hand, was it? No. 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 Okay. Anybody else? How have you all been doing with your Dharma practice during the lockdown then? I'm going to ask you something. How has your mindfulness been during these 2 years? How has your focus been? How much has the Dharma supported you during this time? Has it helped you to deal with COVID? Has it helped you to live under the circumstances you found yourself? I see many people nodding their heads, so that's good.
I think it's been very hard sometimes for me to be mindful, because you do get caught up with your anxiety about your loved ones, about what's happening in the world, and fretting about the future as well. So I have found it very hard to be mindful at times. But you just have to rely on Dharma, and you have to just bring yourself back to your central position and just try and refocus. But it has been very difficult for me, especially losing loved ones and seeing loved ones. You get caught up in that, don't you?
Yeah.
And then it spirals out of control, and you don't know. You feel as if you're losing control, and you just don't know how to deal with everything, and you're juggling all the time. I found it very, very difficult.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I think it's. I think what's important is recognizing the difficulty we get into when we don't have mindfulness, such as like worry. We have to know the drawbacks of worrying about the future, how it saps our energy. It means we are not there. You're not there for your loved ones. If you are so worried about the future, you're not there for the family members who need you right now. You don't have the strength, or you don't have the attention. And so the drawbacks of those mind states, if we really recognize, such as getting angry if somebody is unpleasant to you, and if we recognize the drawbacks of the negative emotions like anxiety also, fear, worry, getting caught up in negative thinking, or negative thinking about oneself, or feeling sorry for oneself. All of these are just like ways of thinking and patterns of thinking that we fall into. And the more we can learn to bring ourselves out of that, the stronger we become. And so we see the repeated pattern happening, and the more we have done it, the more familiar we are, so we should become more able to nip it in the bud, sort of catch ourselves early. That's what mindfulness allows one to do, catch it before it becomes very strong. Because once it becomes very strong, it's like, that's it. Yeah. Yeah.
In a lot of the texts that you read, sort of Gampopa's texts and some of the other texts that we've gone through, it seems like it's very much aimed at like people who are going to go off and become monks, or like you said, go into a cave. How do we ensure that? How do we find the balance with that in being somebody who is in a world? We're worldly people, and I'm just kind of curious as to how you take that, and then you, for example, you could take the texts and try to do that and read the text, which is wonderful. Why it's great to have a teacher like yourself who's able to sort of give us the answers sometimes and be able to guide us, but having an understanding and not taking it too far in our lives to the detriment of our own mental health or things like that. So I was just wondering
Repeat the question, possibly, Lama.
Right. So the question is, how do we, when we read a text like this, adapt it to our life directly as it is now, and not feel that we need to be like Milarepa or Gampopa and have to, they gave it their everything, but we can't. We are not Milarepa, we are not Gampopa, we are also not Mapa, even if a family person. So, yes, so the question is, how does one apply the Dharma without, because sometimes it sounds like it is for monastics mainly. I'd say, I think it's a good question really, because often I think there's a lot of confusion around that. We have to remember that we are not Milarepa, we are not Gampopa, we are not like their main students were. And when the advisor, when we read, for example, when we read their life stories and we see how 100% dedicated they were, we know that if we went to try and do the same as they did, I mean, we wouldn't last very long just living on nettle soup, for example. Living in a cave with no heating, with no soft cushions, with no central heating. I mean, there are many things that, if we look at it realistically, we know that we are not able to do it. But we have to translate it into the mindset, not just the physical. It's not really about whether we live in a cave or not, whether we are monks or nuns or not, whether we are lay people or not, or whether we are family people or not. It's about the mindset. And of course, what the Dharma teaches us is that it's easier to practice the Dharma if you have less distractions around you. So simplicity is advised, generally. But as a layperson, one can do many things to simplify one's life. That's the whole point of going into retreat and like going like Milarepa, going into a cave, is simplicity, So I think it's very important to look at, the Dharma is about me developing my own inner stability, me overcoming my this and that, whatever I have to work with, my own confusion, and me benefiting. So I can become a really wholesome, strong person who is able to do something good with my life and for others, and not just spend my whole life fretting about this or that, or run around in circles, and then not much benefit has come at the end, or even worse, that we might actually cause a lot of suffering. So if you distill the Dharma like that, then I think that's very applicable in any situation. You have to look at your own practical life and say, am I overly involved with what other people think about me? Like this advice of you do yourself a kindness of giving up your neighbors and familiar friends, or whatever it said, neighbors. It's like, am I super involved with what other people think? Neighbors could be like your Facebook friends. It could be, it's like a superficial friendship, isn't it, when you say neighbor? So that's what I think would be meant, is we should not be so swayed by superficial relationships, to the point where it takes us away from what is meaningful. So in that way, I think we need to, of course, to some extent interpret what he's saying, but the key point in all of these 10 aspects is about attachment and aversion. Giving up attachment and aversion, simplifying our life so that we can let go of distraction. And that can be done in so many different ways. So I don't really think he's saying you have to go to a monastery. He was, I'm sure, teaching many lay people as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
No? Okay. Yeah.
This is from the web, and somebody's asked, what is clarity and luminosity?
Clarity and luminosity. Oh yes, this was clarity and luminosity. Was that from today?
Yeah, they just asked.
A question today? Okay.
Yeah.
Clarity and luminosity is the natural state of the mind, you could say. When the mind is undistracted, when the mind is settled, the natural clarity of the mind and the luminosity of the mind emerges. Just like when you have a glass of muddy water, that's the common example for this. You leave that, so here we put a glass of muddy water, and if we leave that long enough, all the mud would settle at the bottom, and the natural clarity and luminosity of that water would appear. So in the same way, the nature of our mind, when all the distractions and all the agitation are allowed to settle. So in meditation, this is why we do Shine meditation, and we allow the mind to settle. Then the natural clarity and luminosity, which is a quality of the mind, will appear. There's no one we can ask whether that's anyone else?
Dharma teaching, can we apply to understand the world and the bad intentions in the world, like what we are facing today? What we are not facing, but to understand what's happening.
So the question is, can we apply the Dharma to understand what's happening in the world?
In particular, which teaching, which message?
Which message? So yes, you definitely can understand or bring understanding into day-to-day life, whatever we experience around us. Let's say the whole political situation that we hear about, struggles between countries like we hear about at the moment. What the Dharma is always teaching us is compassion. All beings want to be free from suffering, non-violence, non-harming, patience, understanding the nature of mind and how the confusion arises in the mind, and so how people can also act out of misunderstood, on the basis of misunderstanding. They can act in ways that cause more suffering or cause suffering for others, or based on selfishness, causing suffering for others. So definitely the Dharma talks about the causes of suffering, and that the cause of suffering is really selfishness, greed, attachment, aversion, and in that sense, in more Dharma terms, you say ignorance of who we are. Well, that's like very much from a Dharma point of view, but in an ordinary sense, you could say selfishness, and that the Dharma is about recognizing we need to give up selfishness and care about others. Stop harming and caring about others. In a very simple term, I'd say. In a more complicated term, you could say like non-duality, and how holding on to a self is what gives rise to attachment and aversion and duality, and as long as there's a sense of duality, then there's always suffering. Are you all aware that His Holiness Gampopa is going to start spring teachings I think on the 11th of March. I don't really think it has been advertised very much.
I don't know.
So you might want to just be aware and keep your. That's why we don't have anything here. We'll be open on the Saturday the 12th, but I think he'll be teaching for about a month.
Is it every day? Or?
No, most likely it's like 2 days teaching, then 1 day off, 2 days teaching, 1 day off. But he changes his dates, so it's not always so precise which day is off, which day is on. Usually it's in the afternoons for a couple of hours.
You can try and work it around work and stuff.
Yeah.
Difficult to know whether to jump in on it as well. Or
I think.
In terms of like being able to do the whole course and not feeling like I'm not doing it. So.
Yeah, you may not. I think many people will not be able to do the whole course.
I was stuck.
If it's on YouTube, I mean, you can go in when you want to, when you have time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so it's
So you've got
recorded.
to
Oh,
find
okay.
a
I
certain
didn't know
hour.
that. I didn't know whether it was just live, as you said.
Yeah, it is. So maybe we'll leave it there for today. And I think that it's really, really nice that you came. And we did manage to do a little bit of Dharma today. And we have had an auspicious start to the opening of Samye Dzong. And then I hope we can continue to open more and more. That's really our wish, and we just have to be gradual in how we do it. But now you know how it works. So let's do the dedication, and I hope to see you again soon. Nam de tam che se pa ne tom ne nye pe da nam pam che ne che ga na je ba la tu pa ye se pe so le do wa sho chang cho sem ne rinpo che ma che pa nam je jo chik che pa nyam pa me pa dang con e con do bel wa sho ge wa de ye nyo do da sha cha chen po do jo ne do wa chi cha ma le pa de ye sa la ge pa sho